Science is the best tool ever devised for understanding how the world works.
Many people still see science as a subject that they studied in school but left behind when they took their final exam.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking.
All right, welcome to a special episode tonight, The Last Human. We're going to be studying the concept of the human artificial chromosome. If we could make better human beings by adding chromosomes, we should. And we're going to explore the implications of a human artificial chromosome from the scientific point of view, from the general public's point of view, and touch on a few of the issues and supporting points as we go along. We are in the Whitefields Educational Foundation studio. We'd like to thank Whitefields for letting us use their facilities. I have Terrell with me.
Hello. I am an exercise science an exercise science major. I'm currently an academic advisor at UVU for the biology department. I teach a couple of biology courses, so this definitely is something that I mentioned. Stem cells, genetic engineering, things of that sort is definitely interesting to me. And so I'm going to be enthused at what we discuss in this topic.
My name is Aaron. I'm a biotechnology student, and I also assist in the teaching of the basic biotechnology class at UVU. And I'm also very interested. One of the things we talk about in Biotech 1010 is gene therapy, and this is very similar, so I'm also very interested.
Hello, I'm Brianna Reams. I'm a professional mechanical engineer, so I'm definitely the least biology-oriented member of the panel. So I guess I'll be mostly standing in as the public in this conversation, but I'm very nerdy and I love science. And I'm interested in this conversation because it's a different topic than I'm used to. When I'm entering into the conversation about issues of science in the public, it's usually one or two deadbeat horse topics that come up over and over again. And this one's just kind of refreshing, and I'm very enthused to learn about it.
And I'm Randy Perry. I'm going to be hosting this conversation. This is a topic that has been kind of lingering, surprisingly, in the background of kind of the more genetic engineering sciences. It originally was proposed really as far back as the early 80s. There was a lab, and I apologize, I don't have the note to say which one it is, but they actually first came out formally publishing about this in 1997. So it's not really something that's new, but it's still very cutting edge, probably due to some of the challenges it would take to actually do it. Essentially, the idea is human beings, as we know, have 23 sets of chromosomes. The concept is, what if we made a 24th set, and in that 24th set, we can fix genetic problems, or we could go ahead and maybe give some different abilities or other things like that.
Yeah, this is very interesting. It's got a lot of similarity to gene therapy because it's adding genes that were missing or removing ones that are faulty. And I find that very interesting. It's just a different method rather than going in and cutting out bad or reinserting in genes that exist. On chromosomes that exist within the genome, they can be simply added.
Yeah, and in my research as I was looking into this is really originally proposed because gene therapy is incredibly difficult, as we know. You've got to go in and not only get in to change the DNA, which is difficult itself. Gene therapy, you've got to change in every single cell in a being or in a living thing, right? This is a little bit different approach, and essentially, if you're a fully formed adult, sorry, this isn't going to help you much. The idea behind this is we can go ahead and sequence embryos and go ahead and add this extra chromosome into an embryo. Let's say you have a mutation, for instance, in the BRCA genes. Myriad Genetics does that analysis up the hill, a company that I've worked for in the past, right? We could go in and say, all right, this embryo has one of these mutations. What is it going to do to the overall protein that those genes code for? Okay, let's go ahead and let's give it one that works proper.
We've kind of, over the last century, we've really discovered how much of a biological machine we are. And this is just, I can't describe it any other way than biological programming. And I think it's cool that we could really flesh out that science and learn to program the way our bodies work.
Yeah, and that's a really fitting analogy, right? I mean, I actually hear a lot of times that, the proteins and the interactions within our cells is kind of like the hardware of a computer and the DNA is the software. And if we can just learn better how the software works, we can actually hijack the machinery to do a lot of different things.
Yeah, that's very true. And, you can go in and completely inactivate one gene or reactivate one gene much more simply. You can go in and activate the gene that has to deal with mucus problems in the lungs and eliminate cystic fibrosis and things like that.
How are you going to, or how is this going to be ethically proven to our society? Now, we have a lot of kind of the concept of Christianity and people who are all about this concept of
Playing God.
Well, yes. But more or less they feel that natural birth is the way to go. We're in essence now saying that we are going to kind of play around with an embryo, and there could be a lot of things that go wrong. We haven't tested this out, or I'm assuming this has not been tested a lot. So what would you encourage, or how would you prove that whether or not this is an ethical practice or not?
So addressing, I think there's two questions within that question.
Yes.
First of all, you're asking, is this ethical to do this? And second of all, you're asking what kind of controls, what kind of research is going to go into this to make sure it's going to work.
Yes.
So I'm going to address the ethical question first of all. Mm-hmm. No matter what technology or science we have, there's always going to be some subset of the population that is going to reject it. And there's probably going to be a lot of people that reject this. However, I believe just like any other technology, once it's around long enough, the people who've rejected it will either continue to reject it and, dig their heels in further, or they will eventually embrace it. To that question, the book that I was reading, the author was at a conference where they were discussing genetic engineering, essentially of the human germline, and that very question came up: is it ethical to mess around with the human genome? And really, I think that I'd fall into the camp of good old James Watson was there, and being the snarky old man that he is, but really delivers things, to the point. He said, paraphrasing, if we could go through and genetically engineer humans to get rid of disease and make humans better, why would we not? People may not be necessarily at this point driving to the end game of we're going to go in and change these genes for people. Genetically engineering humans, it's happening from every back end of, different perspective it possibly could be without people directly saying this is what we're going to do. The implications of everything we learn in molecular biology help support leading to this.
So a large problem I see in the scientific portion of this is heritability. So the biggest problem I've seen with the idea is, say you have one person who has had their genetics changed so that they don't have cystic fibrosis. So they've got an extra set of genes, an extra set of chromosomes that allows them to bypass the disease. And then you have another person who has also had a set of chromosomes put in, so they both have 24 sets. But this second person has had genes put in, or an extra chromosome set put in, so that they can avoid HIV or so that they can avoid cancer. Now, what you've got is two completely different sets of 24th chromosome that should, upon mating, upon creation of a new baby between these two, it should provide recombination and similar genes, but in this case, the 24th set is not identical. They don't work the same, much as the 23 sets that we already have do match up. And if these two don't match up, what is that going to do? Is that going to cause a spontaneous abortion, which is what happens when genes don't match up currently? Or are you going to end up with, a child with 26 sets or 25 sets instead of 24? I find that to be a significant problem.
Also, there's the issue of what happens when two people decide to procreate and one person has had the extra chromosome inserted and the other person hasn't. Then you have a mismatching number of chromosomes that you're trying to put together. And that would be a situation like when you're trying to hybridize two species. And usually, if you get an offspring, then it is sterile.
And those are both very, very real concerns. And they're actually some of the first concerns that I think people addressed as they walked into this. Mario Capici, who is a well-known researcher at the University of Utah, I believe he's still there. I know he was in the past. He actually was given fixing this as a challenge by some professors at a conference. And not only did he come up with a way to fix it, he actually has modeled it and shows that it works in mice. So the long story short, what they do is when they build this artificial chromosome, they actually put some sites that flank the kinetochore, which is the middle. And when the chromosomes are replicated in a dividing cell, the kinetochore is kind of where the two pairs are pulled apart after they're replicated and go to each side of the cell, which become the two cells. He actually has engineered a site that in the presence of a protein that's only expressed in sex cells, it actually will cut the kinetochore out of the chromosome. And when that cell divides, that chromosome is actually jettisoned. It's ejected. It gets eaten up because it doesn't have the proper signaling. And essentially what happens is you as the human being with this 24 set of chromosomes, all of your cells have this 24th chromosome, except for any of your sex cells actually will go back to being the regular human being 23 chromosomes. And this actually makes a lot of sense because if you were an embryo and they went in and they repaired, whatever defects you had by sticking in this extra chromosome, right? By the time you are reproducing, we're, hopefully 20, 30 years down the road, right? You're not going to want to give that same upgraded chromosome to your children because there's probably a much better upgraded chromosome available now. So jettisoning it in the sex cells actually makes sense. And the Capici lab has developed mice that they actually can do this with, and they've put artificial mouse chromosomes in, and it will eject it from the sex cells, and they don't see it. Many, many generations down the line, they still see the chromosome is gone. So essentially your sex cells would go back to just being good old fashioned homegrown human being. And if you wanted to have your children then have these upgrades, you would need to go through the same process with them.
That would work very well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an interesting alternative because then it becomes like farming, genetically modified foods. Like you license the seeds out that are genetically modified for every generation. And I would think that would be a more attractive business model, to be honest, for the companies developing the enhanced chromosomes, because they could be constantly developing new chromosomes all the time and selling it to a new generation constantly instead of just a one-time upgrade.
And we're always learning more about how the human genome affects different things. There, may be genetically inheritable conditions that are negative that we have no idea about right now. And this is a way that you can go in and actually address those and take care of them. And, you wouldn't want to have the same technology. The analogy in the book I read is it talked about, it's not like a father today would want to give his daughter, in the book they said, the typewriter that he used throughout graduate school to write all his papers. Because why would you want to use a typewriter? Why would you want to use an artificial chromosome that's 20, 30 years old? They equated it really, it's like software versions, right? You might have had chromosome, 2.0, but we're way down the road now. We're, artificial chromosome version 40.8. So you would want to upgrade it. So, making it jettison in sex cells is something they've proven they can do with the right signaling and the right engineering. So it would be built into it.
Well, that's very interesting. So built into that, I would think you would want to, in parallel, develop a method that permanently inserts some standard upgrades, like maybe in a 25th or a 26th chromosome, that would not be jettisoned in the sex cells, because built into this whole idea of doing it every generation is a certain amount of hubris that assumes that the high technology state of our society will continue for any amount of time. You know, it's really just a negligible period of time compared to the length of civilization in our species that we've been able to even contemplate this stuff.
Yeah. And I think that this would be a step along the way to going through and actually going in, diving into the genome and repairing everything. This is kind of a workaround, right? Because the human genome, our chromosomes as they are, they're pretty complex. We have a pretty good idea what most of the stuff that's in there does, but we don't know for sure. But it's also a lot harder to go in and snip just the little piece that you want out and replace it with the piece that you want in. It's pretty difficult to do. It's not insurmountable. I honestly would expect that a human artificial chromosome would probably become a thing that we would continue to do with generation to generation, but eventually this extra chromosome would probably become something that we'd carry. It'd probably become standardized, right? That these are all the features that we want on this 24th chromosome. And we'll go in and fix everything else wrong in the genome that's along the way. And eventually you'd hit the point where I think you would have everyone would have this 24th chromosome. And if, the collapse of society technology or say, a mission to Mars with a subpopulation or something like that, right? We could go ahead and just have this now just be a part of human. But the question I think that leads to is, are you still human if we all have a standard 24 set of chromosomes now?
Right. Do you create another species? That
is a significant question, specifically when you do, come involved with the, those who are able to do it and those who are not. When you get to, well, these people have done it and the technology simply isn't available to some people, are they now a different race or maybe even different as species? And even more specifically, once that person has been, given therapy or enhancement, depending on which way you want to look at it, do they want it?
And that's a really good question. The do they want it has been brought up. And one person suggested that we could actually put these artificial chromosomes in under controls, and they'd be more addressed towards later in life issues, like as you get older, you don't metabolize things as well anymore. You become more susceptible to cancers. You become more susceptible to disease. And essentially one person proposed that, well, we upload these chromosomes, but it's under one big on-off switch. And we don't turn it on until you are at a point in life where you need it and it would be helpful. And then you have a choice. You can turn it on or not.
So I guess my question is, how does that affect with these upgrades? Because I'm thinking in my mind, if things are going to be turned on and off as you progress in time, how are they going to fix the concept of or how are they going to know at what age should something turn on? Is that just your natural body as it begins to get this disease? Is it going to all of a sudden say, okay, stop that, prevent that from happening? Is it going to prevent that? And how do they know beforehand what diseases you're going to get at old age or what you're susceptible at an old age? Because there are some healthy people that don't have any disease.
So the answer to that today is it's doing enough full genome sequences of enough people combined with a profile of diseases. I don't think that this is ready to be cooked up and done today, right? So let me say that right away. I'm making the assumption that we will have a full understanding of all of the sequence in the human genome, and we'll be able to, by sequencing your genome, say, okay, you have a bad gene in your BRCA1, so we need to fix that, right? And, you're going to be myopic, so let's go ahead and fix that. And, you're going to be colorblind, so let's fix that gene, right? It's through this genome scanning that we would then know what things we would need to fix, which is another argument for the upgrades by generations, right? What we know today, it's inevitable. We're going to know more tomorrow. So it'd be based completely on what your genome says. And essentially we'd be comparing it to, we know this thing is a problem. Let's fix that with our artificial chromosome. And that's really what the answer to this is. But we could also look at the other thing of taking it to the kind of transhumanist enhancement side, right? We know that there are some people out there who have an extra receptor in their eyes, and they see literally thousands of more shades of color than your average human being does. I think we even know what gene it is at this point. Well, why don't we throw that in there while we're at it? Let's make human beings see better, right? There's a lot of these things that we could go in and start working on these upgrades to start building these, human, superhuman, human 2.0, whatever you want to call them. But really it's based around, we would need to have the understanding, which is why genomics potentially is such a groundbreaking discipline in science. And really it's a lot of these type of things is people thought that, once we crack the human genome, right, we're going to have all this stuff start propagating right away. And so now you hear people like, oh, well, we finished human genome, a decade and a half ago. Where are we seeing from it? The commercial side of it, not as much as people would like. More than most people realize, though. Right now, it's more in the form of simple diagnostics and just understanding connections and, being able to diagnose that, yes, grandma who got breast cancer did have, one of these mutations in the BRCA genes. Mm-hmm. And it continues to grow more and more. Sorry, did I address your whole question?
You did address it completely. And I had another one. And like I said, you may not be able to answer this because I'm not sure how deep in depth you've gotten into the mice experiment that we talked about. What were the results of that? I know that you mentioned a little bit about some of the kind of the positive results of it. What were some of the negatives? Or if you don't know, I apologize in advance, but
I haven't read specifically into the negatives of it, but this is messing with DNA, messing with genomes, messing with chromosomes. I'm sure that the negatives probably mean the mice die. Right? That's really what it comes down to. But they have successfully gotten, first of all, they've gotten germline cells to eject the extra chromosome, but they've also gotten them to show that they will properly line up during cell division and be properly distributed through the cells and be passed on multiple generations when they're made to do that without any problem, and showing the same chromosomes functioning just fine generations down the road, which is where I think, honestly, in the long run, this human artificial chromosome would just become a 24th chromosome, but it would have to go through this stage of where it's removable or upgradable until it became standardized. Eventually, we're going to hit a point, and really, I think by the time we got to generation 2, we'd probably be at the point where we'd be like, these are the upgrades and things that we should fix in the standard 24th chromosome, and we just start putting it in everyone.
Well,
right?
You standardize that 24th chromosome and then start on the 25th with the new discoveries of each generation.
Yeah, which should be doable with biology, but then we really are going to be moving on from being human because a different chromosome number would make us a different species, right?
So I would have to agree with that.
And that's really why, I titled this podcast The Last Human, because I think technology like this, which if we don't blow ourselves up before we get there, we're going to do this as a human species. And if not this specific thing, we're going to do something similar that has the same ends as this. And it's really no different than evolution. The difference is we now understand how evolution works. And we can now actually put the designer behind evolution that a lot of creationists want to say is there in the first place, right? We could actually go in and start designing these things at the genetics level and changing the fate of the human race and the fate of our health and the shortcomings of, our mortal existence, and really start building these things in. Like, for instance, you could put some anti-aging, genes into these things that are turned on when you're 40 years old. They give you an injection and it turns them on, right? It could be as simple as that. There's a lot that could be done with technology like this.
We're coming closer to my dream of being immortal.
Yes, we are.
I agree. I think that eventually this is going to happen, whether it's this specific method or not. we're going to end up with a great enough genetic change that is induced by science, that's induced by people, introducing genetics that didn't exist before, that whether it's additions to existing chromosomes or additional chromosomes, we're going to end up with this one way or the other. And there will be people who do not accept it and will refuse it. And that in the end, by choice, I think we will probably end up with different species, at the basic biological definition, whether they are actually different species or not.
I would have the real concern, I think. Is this child going to still be my child?
This is addressed really well in the movie Gattaca, if you ever watched the start of it. Essentially, everyone is genetically engineered in this future, and this one couple has a child that's not, and then there's all these issues. So their next one, they make sure they do. And there's a scene, they're sitting down with the geneticist, and he talks about, how he's fertilized the egg and gone in and made sure that the specification of eye color and hair color matched, and then says, and I took the liberty of cleaning up any other heritable diseases and issues. And they look at him and say, well, shouldn't we leave some things to chance? And his response is, this child is still you. It's just, this is the best of you. We've gone in and found the best of both of your genes and put it together. What we would do ultimately in the case of this is we wouldn't be taking anything away. We'd be fixing any parts that don't work right. And it would still be your child. It would still look like your child. It'd still behave like your child. But what if your child could not inherit your asthma, not inherit your breast cancer, not inherit your Crohn's disease, not inherit your bipolar disorder? Would you not want that for your child?
So you're ending up looking again at the difference between therapy and enhancement. If we're simply avoiding problems, you could call that therapy. But when we start adding things or working on things that don't matter, when you talk about eye color and hair color, at our current understanding and societal amount of care, hair color and eye color really aren't an issue. I mean, you might like it or think it's cuter or something like that, but it's not something that therapy makes better. It's just the way it is. And I think that's what difference you're asking for there is, can we avoid having problems versus can we make it the way I feel like it would be the best?
What does developments in something like a human artificial chromosome really say about the nature of science, or what does the nature of science say about it?
For me, it tells me that we are advancing in such a manner we're kind of on a precipice. Science is going to be able, through the will of people, to make people different, rather than evolution being directed by natural selection, or rather than have it being directed by chance or by a creator, have it actually be directed by people. We're kind of at an amazing precipice right now where we may actually be able to accomplish that.
I think it makes the human species special in the universe, at least as far as we know. I think it's a complete paradigm shift because humans already have been evolving at a fantastical rate through social evolution, but that hasn't changed the genes so much. This is a third mode of evolution, scientific evolution, that would actually be affecting our biological machinery in a way that, even though social evolution was incredibly rapid, couldn't do.
Yeah, it's freaking amazing. I don't know. I'm just in awe right now. Sorry.
I would just love to be the archaeologist from 1,000,000 years from now to go back and try and figure all this stuff out.
Or the geneticist that has to figure out where in the hell this extra chromosome
exactly.
came from.
All right.
That's your intelligent design evidence right there.
That would be truly amazing. There are these people, and 100 years later, there are these people. Holy cow.
Yeah, a new species from nowhere.
So thank you to everyone that was here on my panel with me. Good night, everybody.
Good.